The husband decided to stop talking to his mom and sister because they asked him to give up the house he and his wife wanted. They wanted him to do this for his sister's husband, who doesn't have a job and spends a lot of time playing games. They also have 6 children. My in-laws have a strained relationship with my husband, and it's affecting me too. When my husband was young, he was the favorite child and very close to his mom. He spent a lot of time with her because his dad was busy with work. But I've noticed that his sister Sarah doesn't get the same treatment. Even though I believe my mother-in-law loves both her kids, she seems to favor my husband. I think Sarah felt that too while growing up, which is why my husband always tried to be a good brother to her. But sometimes both Sarah and my mother-in-law act strangely. For example, when my husband and I first started dating, he was still in college and we all lived together. My in-laws gave my husband his own floor so he could have privacy and invite guests. That's why sometimes I stayed over at his place. But many times in the morning, his sister would come into our room without knocking while we were still asleep. Sometimes we weren't even fully dressed, and she acted like it was normal and started talking about random things. It made me uncomfortable because I wasn't dressed properly. I get that we were living with his family, but is knocking on the door before entering too much to ask for? I understand siblings can be close, but she and I didn't know each other well when we first started dating, so I felt it was disrespectful. I talked to my husband about it and said I wouldn't come over unless he put a lock on his door. He agreed, but the next morning, his sister tried to open the locked door and started yelling at us for locking it. She banged on the door and asked her brother to let her in. Eventually, my husband opened the door and she stormed in, demanding to know why he had put a lock on the door. When she saw me, she pointed at me and insulted me. I was shocked by how rude she was. My husband explained that he wanted the lock, but his sister didn't believe him. She angrily said they shouldn't have secrets as siblings. Jacob explained that he installed the lock so his sister wouldn't walk in while we were sleeping because it was disturbing. Hearing this, his sister angrily blamed me for causing problems between them. I felt overwhelmed and excused myself to the bathroom. I could hear her yelling and Jacob trying to calm her down. When she left, Jacob came to comfort me. He apologized for her behavior and promised to talk to her. The next weekend, she apologized to me, saying she needed to talk to Jacob urgently, which is why she barged in. Jacob firmly told her not to disturb us again, and she agreed quietly. But this wasn't the only strange behavior she had towards Jacob. If we disagreed on something, even something small like movies, and his sister was there, she would start suggesting that he should date someone who had similar tastes to him, and imply that we weren't right for each other. Jacob would give her a disapproving look, but she would just smirk. Another time, she asked me uncomfortable questions about my past, trying to pry into my life. Jacob and I had been open about our past from the beginning, but I didn't feel comfortable sharing it with his sister. Despite that, she would ask me things like why my ex broke up with me or make comments about his past girlfriends being prettier than me. She would do this when we were alone. I started to feel like she was trying to bring me down with her comments. At first, I ignored it, but as it continued, I reached my limit. One day, I responded by saying I preferred my ex-boyfriend's family because they weren't nosy and overbearing like Jacob's family. This surprised her and made her quiet for a while. What I said was true. Even though Jacob's sister had a strained relationship with him, his mom wasn't any better. When I first met her, she ignored me. But when she realized Jacob and I were serious, she acted like I was taking her son away from her. She would deliberately ignore me at dinners and family gatherings, pretending I didn't exist. Sometimes Jacob noticed and tried to talk to her about it, but she never changed. Once she even called me stuck-up and spoiled because I went to a private school while she was a public school teacher. I know she tried to talk Jacob out of marrying me and told him to find someone better. Luckily, Jacob didn't care about her opinion and proposed to me anyway. When his mom and sister found out, they freaked out. They called me, saying it was a mistake, and I should end the relationship and give back the ring. I thought it was strange and refused, telling them they were out of line to ask me to do that when I loved Jacob and wanted to be with him. When they realized I wouldn't change my mind, his mom reluctantly told me to be a good wife to him and take care of him like she did all these years. I felt offended, but I tried not to let her words bother me too much. Sarah, however, accused me of being a gold digger and said Jacob deserved someone of higher status. She threatened to ruin our marriage plans. After that, I talked to Jacob right away, and he was shocked by how rude they were to me. He'd argue with them about it, but they insisted I wasn't good enough for him. He told me to ignore them and assured me he loved me no matter what they said. Although his words were reassuring, it hurt that his family didn't accept me. Jacob and I had decided to pay for our own wedding, so when Nil offered to cover half of our expenses, we politely declined. Jacob explained how hard we had worked to save money for this occasion. Instead of being happy for us, Nil became more upset and told Jacob how sad she was that he didn't need her anymore. However, Jacob's dad was proud of us. He was always supportive and never had an issue with our relationship. Despite Mill's complaints to Jacob, we compromised by suggesting she organize the rehearsal dinner for us, which she agreed to, and we appreciated the gesture. But as the wedding drew closer, things got complicated. The first incident was when Sil invited herself to dinner with us, telling Jacob how much she missed him. By then, Jacob and I were living on our own after getting engaged. When Sil asked to have dinner with us, we thought she genuinely wanted to spend time with her brother, so we agreed. Jacob made sure I was okay with it, and although I wasn't thrilled, I agreed because I didn't want to be rude to Sil, who would soon be family. During the meal, Sil suddenly started talking about how much she hated cheaters and called them terrible names. We were puzzled about where this was going until she looked me straight in the eye and accused me of cheating with my coworker's act. I was confused, and then Sil started yelling, showing pictures of me and Zach, and claiming she caught me in the act. Jacob asked her what she meant, and Sil proudly waved the pictures around, insisting she had proof of my affair. I knew I had never been unfaithful to Jacob since we started dating, so I was curious why she thought I was having an affair with my coworker. Looking at the pictures, they seemed harmless. Zach and I were close coworkers because we both started at the company around the same time, and we helped each other to avoid getting in trouble with our boss. Zach even had a girlfriend, and Jacob knew about her. I didn't have a lock on my phone, and I had always been honest with Jacob about my coworkers. Sil twisted these innocent moments in the photos into something they weren't. Proof of a non-existent affair. It was frustrating and hurtful to have my integrity questioned like that, and I felt annoyed at her attempts to damage my relationship with Jacob. Before I could defend myself, Jacob, shocked and upset, spoke up for me. He asked Sil why she was following me and taking pictures of me with my coworkers without our consent. Sil justified her actions by saying she was investigating me because she was worried I was marrying Jacob for his money. Jacob firmly told her she was wrong and creating drama for no reason. He tried to reason with her, asking her to stop spreading lies, but Sil kept insisting I was having an affair. I tried to explain that we were just coworkers, but she wouldn't listen. Tensions rose as her accusations continued. Fed up with her yelling and false accusations, I told Sil I would file a police report against her for taking my pictures without permission and stalking me. Her expression turned fearful as she asked if I was serious. I assured her that I had evidence and she had intentionally stalked me and taken photos without my consent to spread lies about me. Sil pleaded with Jacob and me, saying she was only trying to protect her brother and didn't see it as a big deal. She begged Jacob to intervene, saying she did it for him, and facing legal action would hurt her future. I told her only she could fix this now. Sil asked what I wanted, and I said I wouldn't press charges if she stayed away from me. At that moment, Sil realized she couldn't escape the consequences. She looked to Jacob, but he supported me, telling her she should be grateful I was letting it go since she was clearly in the wrong. Sil agreed to stay away from me, and we haven't spoken since. Jacob still maintains a relationship with her, but she hasn't approached me since then. The second incident happened the night before our wedding at our rehearsal dinner. Mill, who insisted on organizing it, declined our help and said she had everything under control. But when we arrived, it was clear things hadn't gone as planned. The dinner was on picnic tables with plastic tablecloths, and the food was cold Mexican dishes. Throughout the evening, Mill seemed upset, making the celebration feel off. She got drunk and behaved inappropriately, complaining about the wedding preparations, even though she hadn't contributed financially or in planning. My anger got the better of me, and I had to escort Mill out of the rehearsal dinner. My sister-in-law tried to defend her mother's behavior, but my father-in-law disagreed. It was a disaster, and I worried they would ruin the wedding the next day too. That night, Jacob and I had our first fight. I insisted he uninvite both Sil and Mill because of their behavior, fearing they would try to upstage us at the wedding. Jacob refused, trusting his father to keep them in check. I had to threaten Jacob that if he didn't uninvite them, there would be no wedding the next day. Jacob was shocked by my demand, and I knew it sounded harsh, but I was worried about what these women might do. I didn't want to be embarrassed on my wedding day. Jacob struggled with setting boundaries, but I hoped this ultimatum would make him see how much they were affecting us. Thankfully, Jacob understood and made the right choice. He called his dad early the next morning and uninvited his mother and sister. Phil wasn't surprised and promised to keep them away. As we talked to Phil, Mill and Sylv kept calling Jacob, trying to convince him to let them come to the wedding. But Jacob stood firm, telling them he wasn't comfortable with them thereafter how they treated me. Mill started saying bad things about me for coming between Jacob and his mother, and Sil tried to convince him too. But Jacob didn't change his mind. I felt sorry that Phil couldn't come to our wedding because of his wife and sister. I felt guilty for giving the ultimatum, but I stopped feeling guilty when I found out Sil and Mill planned to wear white dresses to our wedding. Jacob's cousins told me about a family group chat where Sil encouraged others to wear white too, so I wouldn't be the only one. I was shocked they would do something so hurtful. After hearing this, I was glad they weren't coming to the wedding. Jacob missed his family, but he understood why I didn't want them around. Our wedding went well without any drama. After that, Mill and Sil stopped talking to me completely, which was fine by me. They only invited Jacob over for dinner or special occasions, which didn't bother me much. Phil was kind to me, and we stayed in touch. Jacob and I saved up and bought our first home this year. We were thrilled to own such a big place. His parents and Sil visited for a small housewarming celebration, but I avoided them by spending time with my family. Now on to the main issue. Last month, my mother-in-law called me out of nowhere. This was surprising because we haven't spoken since I married Jacob. She asked me how I've been and about my life. I was surprised by her sudden interest but answered her questions. Then she asked how it felt to live in a big house with just Jacob and me. Her words hurt because Jacob and I have been trying to have a baby for a long time. But I have some fertility issues, so I can't get pregnant. Jacob knows this, and though we're sad about it, we've accepted it. I even told Jacob he could divorce me if he wanted to have kids with someone else, but he's always supported me. He assured me that it was okay for us not to have children as long as we had each other. Our families knew about this too, which is why Mill made a subtle comment about it. Then she told me that my sister-in-law was pregnant. I was surprised because this would be her 6th child. Jacob had told me that her husband didn't have a job and didn't believe in using protection, which led to these unplanned pregnancies. He was lazy and didn't help around the house or pay any bills. Sil had to work multiple part-time jobs while he spent all day playing video games. Despite everyone advising her to leave him, Sil stayed with him. My mother-in-law continued, suggesting that since Sil couldn't afford to keep working during her pregnancy, Jacob and I should give up our house because it was too big for a childless couple like us. I was shocked and speechless. I asked if she was joking, but Mill insisted she was serious. She said Sil and her husband deserved a bigger house, and since she didn't have room for them, she wanted them to move in with us. The weight of this announcement hung in the air, and I struggled to compose a response amid the whirlwind of emotions. I explained that this was our house, which we were still paying for, and the idea of someone else moving in without our permission was intrusive and ridiculous. However, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law insisted that they had already talked with Jacob and he had agreed. This seemed bizarre, as Jacob and I always shared everything with each other, and I was certain he would have told me if he had agreed to let his sister and her family stay with us. I firmly told Mill that since the house belonged to both me and Jacob, he couldn't give permission without my consent. No one was allowed to live with us unless we both agreed. To compromise, I offered to host Sil and her husband for a few days, but I wouldn't allow them to move in permanently. Mill started yelling, saying that as a dutiful daughter-in-law, it was expected of me to make space for them, and if I agreed, all our past issues would be forgiven. In anger, I stood my ground, unwilling to let them intrude on our home. I replied, sure, I'd be happy to let them have our place. But we're still paying for it, and I know Sil and her husband won't help with the mortgage or bills, so you should take responsibility and help pay for them to live here. If you can cover the mortgage, we'll handle the bills. Since you can't do that with just one job, when are you getting a second job to pay off the debt? Hearing this, Mill erupted in rage, shouting and expressing her displeasure. She said it was ridiculous for me to ask her to pay the mortgage, and I retorted that it was equally ridiculous to expect us to take care of Sil's family and let them move in. This made her even angrier, and she continued to yell while I smiled in satisfaction. She disconnected the call when she realized I wasn't going to give in to her demands. Soon after, my sister-in-law called, yelling at me for daring to ask her mother to pay our mortgage. She accused me of being a gold digger. I told her that she was the one being a gold digger for trying to live with us and pointed out that her partner did nothing to help her. This seemed to shut her up. I firmly told her that she could bicker with me all she wanted, but I would never allow her family into our house unless they were willing to help with the mortgage. She accused me of being heartless and prioritizing money over family. The tables had turned, and I felt relieved to stand up for myself, regaining control of my home. However, I do feel a bit guilty thinking about my husband, and I am here on Reddit wondering if what I have done makes me an **** hole. Update 1. ***. Thank you to everyone who has shown their support for me. To answer the most important question everyone keeps asking, why would my mother-in-law even demand such a ridiculous thing from us? It's because my mother-in-law has always been this entitled. Clearly, my husband has let this charade go on for far too long, and he and I need to sit down and have a serious talk about this. It's pathetic how my mother-in-law can lie about her own son just to get her way. My sister-in-law is just a pawn in her play, going along with whatever her mom wants because my mother-in-law has always heavily favored my husband. My sister-in-law listens to whatever her mom says, hoping for her favor. In this case, my sister-in-law stood to gain from the situation, relying on us to pay her bills and take care of her children while her worthless husband did nothing. I'm waiting for my husband to return from his business trip so we can talk about this in person. It's too important to discuss over the phone. Update 2. It's been 3 days since my last update. As I mentioned earlier, I was waiting for my husband to return so we could sit down and talk. When he got back, I told him about how his mother had called me, demanding that we give up our house for his sister and her family. Jacob was clearly taken aback by this. I went on to tell him the entire story, and he confessed that he had no idea about any of this. The only thing his mother had told him before he went on the trip was that his sister was pregnant. That's all he knew about the situation, and he had no idea she would make such ridiculous demands. I told him firmly that I expected him to talk to his mom about this and handle it since I couldn't deal with his family anymore. He agreed. Jacob called Mill right in front of me and asked why she had lied to me about him. Caught off guard, Mill tried to backtrack, saying she didn't exactly lie. She claimed she knew he wouldn't have a problem with his sister living with us, so she decided to take matters into her own hands and asked me directly. Jacob interrupted her, asking why she assumed he would have no problem with Sil and her whole family moving in. Mill replied that since he and Sil were close, she thought he would want to help her out by letting her family move in. Hearing this, I closed my eyes in frustration but kept quiet, letting Jacob handle his mother. He firmly told her there was no way he would let Sil, her jobless husband, and their 6 children move in with us. Mill started yelling, but Jacob stood his ground, saying it wasn't our responsibility. I started to suggest we could help because Phil didn't want them and their house was small, but Jacob interrupted me. He angrily told me it was insensitive to suggest I should take care of Sil's kids just because I was childless. It shocked me, and for the first time I saw his face change color. He yelled that Mill couldn't use that against me to force me to take care of Sil's children. He continued telling her that Phil rightfully didn't want anything to do with Sil since she had become like a child birthing machine, and he was done with both of them. Mill tried to backtrack, but Jacob kept yelling at her that he had tried his best to have a good relationship with them even after they had continuously disrespected me, but he couldn't take it anymore. Mill started begging, but Jacob told her that this was our house and I was his wife. Anyone who disrespected me disrespected him as well and didn't deserve to stay in his life. With those final words, Jacob ended the call. Since then, he has had no contact with both Sil and Mill. Phil did call to talk to him, but after learning of the entire incident, he understood why Jacob had taken such a drastic decision. Phil talked and apologized to me on behalf of his wife, but I told him it wasn't his fault anyway. Update 3. It's been an interesting 2 weeks. Many people suggested I install cameras around my place just in case Mill and Sil decided to show up and create a scene. So I ordered them online and installed them all around my place. Well, as luck would have it, they did decide to show up last weekend, knocking on my door while I was all alone. When I saw them from my camera, I called Jacob immediately, and he said he was on his way. When I opened the door, there they were, my Mill and Sil, looking furious. They demanded I let them in, but I stood my ground, refusing to allow them entry and telling them that if they had anything to talk about, they could talk to me from outside. Nibbles yelling about how heartless I was and accusing me of being greedy and selfish didn't faze me. I calmly reminded her that this was our home, and they had no right to barge in uninvited. She continued her rant, unaware of the cameras capturing every moment. I calmly reiterated our previous conversation, stating firmly that I wouldn't be giving up my home for Sil and her husband. I suggested she wait for Jacob to come back home if she had anything further to discuss. Sil then started yelling, accusing me of breaking up the family for no reason and being too stubborn. She labeled me a gold digger and accused me of trying to take her brother away from them. I then informed them that whatever they were saying was being recorded on our cameras, and that I would be using this evidence to get a restraining order against them so that next time they couldn't come within 50 feet of our house. Their eyes widened in shock, and Mill yelled that I wouldn't dare to do that. I smirked at her and told her that if they didn't get out of our property this very minute, she would be receiving a legal order very soon. This scared them straight, and Sil started to say how I was overreacting and that it wasn't a big deal. Fortunately, at this point, Jacob arrived. He walked towards us calmly and asked Mill what they were doing there. Mill rushed to hug him, but he deflected her and asked her firmly again what she and Sil were doing here. Sil started to say that they knew it was me who was trying to control his life by not letting him talk to us, and that they had come here to confront me. I rolled my eyes at how absurd they both sounded. Jacob clarified to both of them that it was he who had made the decision to go no contact and that he did not want anything to do with the both of them. Mill started to beg him at this point to forgive her, but he simply asked them to leave the property or he would have no choice but to call the police. Their eyes widened in shock. Clearly, both of them had not expected this reaction from him. Jacob went on to tell them that if they ever showed up at our house again, then he and I would be free to call the police on them and have them removed forcefully. They looked devastated, but Jacob didn't care anymore. I felt relieved that my husband was finally standing up for me. Eventually, both of them left, still fuming. Since then, Jacob has talked with Phil also, who was as shocked as us that Mill and Sil had gone behind his back to show up at our house unannounced. He assured us that we were right not to let them in, and he is also becoming increasingly frustrated with their behavior. I know that with Jacob being so firm about it and kicking them out, they will not dare set foot on our property ever again. If they do, well, I will contact a lawyer and send them a notice immediately. I am glad that my husband has finally realized how toxic his family is, and hopefully they won't trouble us anymore so we can peacefully live our lives. I hope this is my last update since I want to move on from this situation as well.